Despite suffering multiple defeats, one of the most persistent names in the annals of Sith history was Kressh. Kressh had already defeated a major rival in Kagath when he stepped up as one of the contenders for the title of Dark Lord, in the wake of Marka Ragnos' death. Ultimately, Ludo perished in battle against his hated rival, Naga Sadow, and was only briefly survived by his son, Elko. Several centuries later, Exal Kressh led a rebellion against Sith Emperor Vitiate, though he too was defeated, forcing his family to flee Sith space. Exal Kressh continued her family's history of sedition. Born on the Outer Rim world of Lenico IV, Exal was chosen by Emperor Vitiate to serve as his apprentice, and was welcomed back into the Empire. Active as a Sith Lord during the Great Galactic War, which started 3,681 years before the Battle of Yavin, Kresh's role within Vitiate's power base was as his deep lore retrieval agent, dredging up holocrons, chasing myth, becoming myth. Her latest mission brought her back to Lenico, investigating legends of immortal patriarchs who lived on through their descendants among the native Ortolan tribes. Once she learned their secrets, she exterminated them. However, Exal Kresh's success became her downfall, the knowledge she brought to her emperor leading to her own enslavement. She became one of the first children of the emperor, a mind-dominated thrall. As his apprentice, his sole instrument, she was content, but she refused to suffer the insult of being the first of 1,000 slaves. 3,678 years before the Battle of Yavin, Exal Kressh made her move, abandoning her current duties in the Cathal Rift and fleeing towards Republic space. She made contact with a Republic agent in the Paragus system, and was in communication with Jedi Master Jurban Hullis, providing valuable intelligence on Imperial military deployments. In response, Vitiate and the Sith Dark Council dispatched the disgraced apprentice Tanib Kel to hunt her down, a disposable pawn on a suicide mission. Kel tracked Kressh to the Lenico Colony Blue space station, only to walk into her ambush. Kressh had used her connection to Vitiate to fool him into believing that she was focused on returning to Lenico, wasting time sending his hunters after her there and allowing the Republic strike she had helped coordinate to reach its target. Destroying the station to cover her retreat, she returned to Korriban. Exal Kressh had arranged the Battle of Korriban with the goal of destroying the children of the Emperor, and operated as the Republic's inside woman, tasked with destroying the Sith Academy from within. However, though she successfully infiltrated the Academy via the tombs, she was again confronted by Tanib Kel, who had learned her intentions after a vision quest on Lenico. Though Kressh dominated Kel in battle, she was ultimately defeated through treachery, impaled from behind with a telekinetically thrown lightsaber. She died mocked by Vitiate, while Tanib Kel used his knowledge of the Emperor's children, secret until now, to leverage the Dark Council into making him a lord. From the ashes of Exal Kressh rose Darth Thanaton. Though an unknown when he burst onto the galactic scene 138 years after the Battle of Yavin, Darth Wredd's background couldn't have been more traumatic. Born on the low-tech Outer Rim world of Mala, he spent his early life as a hunter and blacksmith, while developing his talents as a latent Force sensitive. Though successful at defending his people against a barbarian invasion, he was hopelessly overmatched by the Sith. From the bridge of their flagship, he watched as Mala was used as a test site for Vul Eisen's new superweapon, which scoured it of life and ejected it from its home system. Conscripted into the One Sith Order as an apprentice, he was locked into a Sith torture mask, stripped of his identity, and left to ruminate on the extermination of his people. However, Redd's formal training didn't begin until after the final death of Darth Krayt, so he was brought up primarily as a covert operative. His brutish master was an effective instructor but easily manipulated, so in a brilliantly calculated move, Red made the death of his master the first step in his larger plan to flush out the Sith, engineering his master's duel with Imperial Knight Yalta Val on the rogue planet Mala. Backstabbing his master and capturing Val, Red assumed the knight's identity and traveled to the nearby Carreras Array, commandeering the local security forces while leaving Val in the care of his accomplice Daiben on Mala. Though successful at locking down the system and co-opting the communications project, he ran afoul of Imperial Knight Jawa Sam and the scavenger Anya Solo, who attacked him on board the array. However, Red had already gained remote control of the Carreras Array transmitter and had placed the array on a collision course with the rogue planet. From his hideout, he prepared a live broadcast execution of Yalta Val, but was interrupted by Anya Solo, who provided Val with a lightsaber. In the ensuing duel, Red was narrowly defeated, but managed to escape, claiming that the damage had already been done. Red almost immediately embarked on a campaign of assassination, hunting down and killing Sith infiltrators. By targeting his own kind, he convinced the Galactic Triumvirate to remain hands-off, effectively allowing Red to do their work for them. In the meantime, Red had become focused on Jawa Sam and started making overtures. When Assam went rogue in order to hunt down Red, Red used his accomplice Daiben as bait to draw Assam to the poisoned world of Mon Calamari, effectively sicking him on the resident Sith overlord Darth Luft. This string of Sith killings, either perpetrated or orchestrated by Darth Rad, motivated the One Sith Order to mobilize and hunt him down. When Jawa Sam was arrested for deserting the Imperial Knights, Red broke into the Coruscant prison where he was being held and abducted him. Assam was used as bait to draw a retrieval team consisting of Anya Solo and a squad of Trandoshan stormtroopers to Mala, who were forced to ally with Rad when the One Sith Order converged on the planet. The stormtroopers in turn were able to summon the Imperial Knights, led by Empress Marasiah Fel. The Battle of the Floating World was the culmination of Darth Rad's revenge scheme, and was nothing less than the latest Sith extinction event. After the battle proper, Red attempted to goad Jawa Sam into murdering him by attacking Empress Fel, completing his revenge by killing the apparent last survivor of the One Sith, while planting the seeds for another reformation by converting Zhao. Instead, Darth Redd was coldly gunned down by Anya Solo. Both Exal Kressh and Darth Rad were enslaved by their masters, blindly lashing out like the animals they were reduced to. Both attempted to break free of these shackles by forging alliances with their traditional enemies, but instead of truly freeing themselves, they simply lashed out at their erstwhile former comrades. Instead of achieving self-actualization, they knowingly followed a path of nihilistic self-destruction. Ultimately, the damage done to them by their masters was irreversible, and the only victory they could hope for was death. Exal Kressh was the primary antagonist of the Old Republic webcomic series Blood of the Empire, published in 2010. She is also mentioned in the Old Republic Encyclopedia. Darth Rad is the primary antagonist of the Legacy Volume 2 comic series, published from 2013 to 2014. Further information is provided in the Legacy Handbook Addendum, featured in the 4th trade paperback titled Empire of One. I also think I should offer my response to the Battle of the Floating World, and whether or not it constituted a true and total extinction of the Sith. Short answer, no. All of the established Sith characters who survived the Legacy series proper, namely Darths Nihil, Talon, Malady, and Havoc, are unaccounted for. And to be frank, it's doubtful that they would have shown up at the battle anyway. While I will concede that the overwhelming majority of the One Sith Order was exterminated, a total extinction is unlikely. If anything, Red probably did Nihil a favor, as Nihil had effectively fallen into his position as acting Dark Lord, and didn't command the same level of respect as Darth Krayt. While Krayt's surviving inner circle could be trusted to place the ideology ahead of their ambitions, betrayal within the rank and file was practically inevitable, as Darth Rad himself demonstrated. So with all of that out of the way, let us begin. Exal Kressh and Darth Rad. If these two harbingers of vengeance were to meet in single combat, who would win? The dominant species within the Sith Empire, the Sith purebloods, were the descendants of the original Sith of the Golden Age. It is therefore ironic that the term pureblood was a misnomer, as centuries of interbreeding with humanity had watered down their genetic purity to the point where the original Sith species effectively ceased to exist. Though Exal could trace her lineage back to Ludo Kressh, the only Sith species traits that she retained were the red skin and yellow eyes, and she was otherwise a conventional humanoid female. Standing at medium height and boasting an athletic build, Kressh originally favored the armored robes typical of Sith Inquisitors, but after going rogue, she swapped out for appropriated smuggler's garb. Though intended to be inconspicuous rather than imposing, the emphasis on concealment and mobility meshed well with her more skill-based approach to combat. Beneath the mantled overcoat, she wore bracers, a chest piece, and armored boots, with everything else composed of heat-resistant fabrics, likely armor weave. In regards to physical performance, her prime stats were dexterity and agility, leveraged through one-handed blade work and nimble footwork. Her demonstrated endurance was respectable, tanking blaster fire to the back with the aid of the smuggler's armor and shrugging off an abdominal kick delivered by Teneb Kel. However, though Kressh was perfectly capable of digging in and slugging it out, her strength wasn't truly tested against Kel. And at the end of the day, Exal Kresh's greatest asset was her strength in the Force, and she was at her best when keeping her distance and leveraging this power. Though their original homeworld was lost to time, humanity was the most common species in the galaxy, the dominant figures in galactic history, and the baseline against which all others were compared. Darth Rad's origins were far removed from this influence. Though Mala had some access to the galactic community, it was a low-tech world, downright medieval at times. However, even this was a step above his cruel Sith apprenticeship, which was defined by the Sith torture mask he was forced to wear, stripping him of his identity. The facial scars left by the infernal contraption became Red's defining features, alongside his platinum blonde buzz cut and frequently yellow eyes. Darth Wredd boasted a towering muscular physique, and after losing an eye to Jao Assam, he kept the right side of his head sheathed beneath a cybernetic facial covering. Though a seemingly superfluous addition for such a minor wound, it was clearly an aesthetic choice, feeding into his projected image as an invincible Sith warlord. Otherwise, he wore a repainted set of Imperial Knight armor, stolen from Yalta Val. Modeled after Darth Vader's armor, the base layer armor-weave bodysuit was laced with Frike alloy fibers, while the heavy Durasteel breastplate and pauldrons could turn aside anything short of a dedicated lightsaber thrust or cleave. Curiously, Red's set appeared to lack the standard-issue Cortosis gauntlets. In regards to physical performance, Red's primary attributes were strength and agility, which he leveraged through reckless offensive lunges, aiming for one-hit kills. Though he has been outfenced, his skills with Jarkai dual-blade combat demonstrated his high dexterity. However, easily Red's most valuable trait was his incredible tolerance for pain and injury, developed by the Sith torture training and allowing him to shrug off major hits. This hardiness went a long way towards compensating for his inconsistent combat performance, allowing him to tank the hits he is so often forced to take. Though Sith purebloods are typically attributed with greater than human resiliency, I don't believe that this pertains to Exal Kressh. Her Sith blood was so watered down that she only retained the red skin and yellow eyes, and though she was clearly no lightweight, there is no evidence of superhuman durability. By contrast, though Darth Rad was a baseline human, his cybernetic facial covering is functional armor, even if it is overkill given the original wound. Though both possessed traditional humanoid physiologies, their performance levels and builds were quite different. Kressh boasted superior dexterity, while Red had the strength advantage, and both demonstrated comparable levels of agility. While it is true that Kresh's resiliency was never tested, her success was predicated on her ability to avoid direct physical confrontations, where Red relied on his hardiness. Their respective outfits meshed well with their approaches, but Red's Imperial Knight armor was specifically designed for lightsaber dueling, while Kresh's smuggler's garb was merely intended for firefights. Though Kressh can endure blaster fire, she has no defense against lightsaber hits. In essence, Darth Redd was a heavily armored melee tank who powered through injury, where Exal Kressh was a lightly armored dancer brought low by hits that she didn't need to take. Darth Redd gets the edge for physical capabilities and equipment. Exal Kresh's role as Emperor Vitiate's retrieval agent entailed a strong focus on combat, as few individuals were inclined to cooperate with the Sith. Given the degree to which she outclassed Teneb Kel, she was clearly an experienced duelist. A hardened killer, she had no qualms about butchering innocents to achieve her ends or cover her tracks. Known to have perpetrated the massacre of the native tribes of Lenico and destroying the Lenico Colony Blue Station merely to keep Teneb Kel tied up. Armed with a standard Sith lightsaber fitted with a synthetic ruby, Kresh's lightsaber technique was defined by her preference for one-handed blade work and linear fencing postures, which strongly suggested training in Makashi. However, rather than follow the contention form's cut-and-thrust moveset, she favored simple hack-and-slash strikes, while using her free offhand for combat casting, which indicated a likely background in Naiman. Her use of the reversed grip pointed to some knowledge of Xi'an. But more than anything else, the form most heavily suggested was Juyo, which aligned with her purely offensive focus and heavy use of dark side channeling. As I see it, Exal Kresh's skill configuration would be most comparable to that of Inquisitor Jarek, in that her lightsaber skills are secondary to her force abilities, but they are still highly developed. Makashi would prepare for inevitable confrontations with other Jedi and Sith, providing an edge in lightsaber duels. Naiman maintains general combat effectiveness while maximizing her ability to leverage her force talents, and boasting a highly comprehensive technique that would obviously include strikes with the reversed grip. And Juyo, as always, would play the role of technical focus, while continuing the force focus via dark side channeling. The typical weakness associated with the ferocity form was compromised defense, and Kressh was no exception. She compensated by adopting a hit-and-run attack pattern, goading enemies into pursuing her before abruptly counterattacking, covering her bases by keeping the opponent off balance. Her strategic planning ability was demonstrated in the ambush she laid for Teneb Kel on board Lenico Colony Blue. The battle took place in the cryostasis bay, which Kressh had populated with aerosol dispensing droids, which she used to harass and herd Kel, controlling the engagement by controlling the environment, subvert and overwhelm. Where Exal Kresh's weaknesses manifested was in her tunnel vision focus, becoming so fixated on her opponent that she left herself vulnerable to attacks from other vectors. She was at her best when keeping her distance and relying on her force abilities, maintaining a broader awareness by effectively encompassing and controlling the engagement. Conversely, she was at her most vulnerable in close combat, as the closer she is, the narrower her focus. Before Darth Rad was conscripted into the One Sith Order, he began as a self-taught Force warrior on his homeworld, his successful defense of his village earning him the name Guardian of his People. Though he derided his Sith master as a thug, the man was an exceptional combatant, and his training produced results. After going rogue, Rad established himself as one of the foremost Sith hunters of the era, assassinating numerous Sith infiltrators in one-on-one fights, and killing off the bulk of the Order by instigating the Battle of the Floating World. Armed with a standard lightsaber fitted with a red-hued synthetic crystal, Red's personal technique was generally quite simple and direct. He typically used dynamic lunges and acrobatics to deliver sweeping cleaves, chops, and thrusts. When fighting defensively, he favored balanced, upright postures and two-handed blocks, all the while aggressively subverting and blindsiding adversaries with integrated telekinesis. Furthermore, Red was a capable dual-blade fencer, and was not above scavenging fallen weapons to enable this skill. The simplicity of his technique combined with his skill with telekinetic integration and dual saber combat strongly suggested a training specialization in Nyman. This is supported by his takedown of AG-37 on board the Carreras Array, which was a perfect example of the Nyman draw closer technique. In fact, it is heavily implied that the moderation form is the core lightsaber discipline within the One Sith, as the Order's founder, Darth Krayt, is a confirmed Nyman specialist, and many of his followers, including Red's master, demonstrated skills and tactics that correlated with Form 6. Red demonstrated his master's influence in his aggressive, uncompromising use of all of his skills, rapidly alternating between lightsaber strikes and telekinesis to unload on the opposition. Darth Rad's perfect balance between these skills and his aggressively proactive use of them allowed him to seize control of situations and deal out massive amounts of damage extremely quickly. In this manner, he immediately disabled 3 of his 4 assailants on board the Carreras Array and slaughtered numerous Sith on Mala. However, the thinly spread nature of Nyman showed itself in Red's inconsistent defense, which led to him taking hits against Zhao Assam, Yalta Val, and the Katamai Sith. His saving grace was his hardiness, allowing him to tank hits and keep fighting, though even this had its limits. As a fighter, Darth Rad falls into the same mold as Exar Kun. He's a talented but inexperienced warrior who compensates for his lack of developed skill by being as ferocious and unpredictable as possible. The difference is that where Exar Kun created a customized lightsaber that provided more attack options, Red opted for strong force abilities to blindside opponents and good armor to give himself a margin for error. Like Exar Kun, Darth Rad appears to be better than he actually is, but unlike the egotistical Kun, Red is aware of this and has built his tactics accordingly. While the exact length of their respective apprenticeships have not been confirmed, we can make estimates based on the details provided. Kressh had no doubt been serving Vitiate for well over a decade, racking up a significant amount of field experience as Vitiate's retrieval agent. By contrast, Red had likely been with his master for less than 5 years when he betrayed him, and the need for concealment during much of that time would have curbed the amount of experience he gained. However, almost all of Red's experience pertained to battle, whether fending off the Shore Goya on his homeworld or hunting Sith infiltrators after going rogue. By contrast, much of Exal Kresh's career consisted merely of terrorizing the defenseless. In the realm of armament, there was no advantage either way. Both wielded nondescript Sith lightsabers with bloodshine synthetic focusing gems. This parity did not extend to their techniques. Kressh was significantly more developed and consistent, and would have a relatively easy time subverting Red's basic technique. That being said, Red's forceful and direct application was still a good foil for Kresh's dexterous subversion, bullying through her interference with brute strength. Both reinforced lightsaber combat with heavy force integration, but Kressh was actually capable of contending purely on the back of her technique, where Red leaned on his force talents to compensate for what he lacked in skill, or resorted to workarounds like dual lightsabers. Darth Rad is essentially a combatant who has been trained to function like Darth Maul, a skill-based warrior assassin, but is trying to reinvent himself as Darth Malgus, a strength-based melee tank. He's trying to reconcile opposites, wielding techniques designed for subversion as a blunt instrument, and as a result, his skill set lacks cohesion. While Red has done a better job of rallying from setbacks than Kressh has, he still allows himself to fall into such situations far more often, and most of his success was predicated on his balance between lightsaber combat and force abilities. Purely in the realm of the former, he was lacking. A pure lightsaber duel between these two would play out similarly to Count Dooku's first duel with Anakin Skywalker in Attack of the Clones. Red would physically pressure Kressh, but he would ultimately be outfought by her superior technique. Exal Kressh gets the edge as a lightsaber duelist and martial artist. As the apprentice to Emperor Vitiate, arguably the greatest Sith ritual master in galactic history, Exal Kressh was virtually guaranteed a comprehensive education in the dark arts, especially given her role as Vitiate's deep lore retrieval agent. Though her knowledge base no doubt extends much farther, she is known to have at least a theoretical knowledge of essence transference, gleaned from the Lenico tribes before she exterminated them, and as the first child of the Emperor, first-hand experience with telepathic control and possession. Kressh described the process as being hollowed out and filled with his strength, and all of her showings in regards to telepathic abilities related to how she grappled with this connection. Though constantly subject to Vitiate's projected thoughts and emotional manipulation, she was strong enough to resist his direct control, and showed her conniving nature by exploiting the connection to blind him with dreams, as she termed it. However, the only way she could circumvent the connection completely was by placing herself in cryostasis. When she was active, Vitiate's overbearing influence was constantly eroding her sanity. As a Sith Inquisitor, Kresh's primary tools in battle were her force abilities. With telekinesis, her kinetic output was sufficient to shatter a stone pillar with a force push, and she demonstrated the ability to manipulate multiple objects at a time when she force-choked 3 targets simultaneously while hurling back 2 of them. Though her passive barrier was never tested, her active force shield was powerful enough to pulverize the flurry of crystalline permaglass shards hurled by Teneb Kel. Her ability to manhandle Kel indicated a reliable ability to penetrate the TK barriers of inferior adepts, though there is some question as to how she would fare against an adept of comparable power. Kresh's favorite combative ability by far was Force Lightning, hers being powerful enough to kill multiple targets and leave victims with disfiguring burns. Most impressively, when Kel attempted to absorb the energy with his saber staff, Kresh's lightning instead overloaded and destroyed the weapon. Her typical approach was to open with force abilities and harass her opponents from a distance. Her use of the aerosol droids to herd Teneb Kel during their battle in the cryostasis bay demonstrated her ability to encompass and control engagements by controlling the environment, and she was likely capable of producing a similar result with telekinesis, a possibility glimpsed when she hurled the debris from the shattered pillar at Kel. However, she was constantly subject to Vitiate's subversive influence, which left her emotionally unstable and bloodthirsty. When she rages, she regresses to physical combat, and though this anger feeds her dark side channeling and bolsters physical enhancement, it also means that she fails to make full and effective use of all of her powers. Furthermore, there is no evidence that Kressh was capable of either force healing or tutu minis, which left her with no way to mitigate injury and no force-based defense against lightning, though to be fair, she was highly adept at using her lightsaber to redirect lightning. Exal Kressh was at her best when in control of herself and the situation, and at her worst when blinded by rage, and due to Vitiate's corrosive influence, her composure was a fragile thing. Darth Wredd's force sensitivity expressed itself from an early age through his uncanny skill as a hunter and marksman. When he began actively developing this talent, modeling himself after the Jedi, he displayed an early aptitude for telekinesis. These nascent abilities allowed him to defeat local threats, but he was completely overmatched by the Sith. The destruction of his people and everything he had known was the beginning of his dark side apprenticeship. The Sith torture helmet that Redd was locked into indicated that his training centered around focusing through and drawing strength from pain, a demonstration of his master's brutishness. Hatred for his tormentor brought Redd to the dark side, and he learned to manipulate this Sith thug. There is the distinct impression that by the time of his ascendance, Redd had already learned everything his master had to teach, with the dominance hierarchy determined by strength alone. A warrior assassin, Darth Redd's jack-of-all-trades skill set balanced well between open combat and covert operations. His successful ambush of Fenost on the floating world demonstrated his skill with force concealment, hiding his force signature from an army of Sith Lords, all of whom were actively searching for him. Furthermore, he successfully infiltrated the personal residence of the Sith infiltrator on Katamai, and later broke into a military prison on Coruscant while avoiding detection by any local Imperial Knights or Jedi. Though he was forced to engineer the battle between his master and Yalta Val to facilitate his ambush, this was likely due to his master's familiarity with Redd's force signature. Redd's primary combative ability was telekinesis, typically used as a direct supplement to lightsaber combat. His applications included force grip, force pull, force push, and force throw, typically used to either manhandle opponents or use environmental features as weapons. During the Battle of the Floating World, Redd and Jawa Sam combined their powers to topple the wreckage of the Carreras Array onto the one Sith army, killing hundreds. Given that the wreckage clearly weighed thousands of tons, this indicated that Redd's lifting strength was in the multi-ton range at least. However, given his preference for attacking force wielders with thrown objects, his ability to penetrate telekinetic barriers is questionable, and his own barrier has never been tested. Redd compensated for this inconsistency by employing all of his abilities with maximum intensity and aggression, further enabled by ambushes and surprise offensives. The toppling of the Carreras Array wreckage was the greatest example of his skill for using the environment as a weapon, while his earlier retaliation on board the Carreras Array demonstrated his ability to maintain offensive pressure by alternating his powers and skills. His success was predicated on his balance, compensating for his lack of development in specific areas by leveraging all of his abilities in tandem. But this lack of development still led to him taking hits when forced to rely on individual skills. His inability to mount a force-based defense against lightning was demonstrated when the Katamai Sith unleashed the ability against him. Though Red successfully defended with his lightsaber, the attack brought his advance to a halt, allowing the Katamai Sith to land hits. Yalta Val's successful defense against Red's telekinesis prevented him from seizing any sort of dominant edge over the Imperial Knight. And intriguingly, Red adopted Jarkai for the bulk of the Battle of the Floating World, instead bolstering physical enhancement with darkside channeling. Starting from the top, there is no question that Exal Kressh is the more developed Force wielder. As the apprentice to her era's reigning Sith ritual master, she was steeped in the arcane lore of the dark side. By contrast, Red's master was a warrior assassin who trained his student through torture and abuse, encouraging him to channel the raw power of the dark side rather than hoard knowledge. That being said, though Kressh had the greater knowledge base, Red's practical focus and experience is not to be discounted. Both reinforced physical enhancement by channeling their rage, and neither of them demonstrated any skill with the healing arts or with Tutaminis. However, the absence of the latter was only a weakness in the case of Red. Conversely, Kresh's compromised mental state likely left her vulnerable to telepathic interference from other assailants, as most of her energy is being devoted to fighting off Vitiate's influence. However, though this would make Red's use of force concealment more effective, facilitating his ambushes, he can't fully exploit this vulnerability because he doesn't possess any active telepathic abilities. Kresh's applications of telekinesis were generally quite precise and concentrated, where boulder-chucking Red was more overtly destructive. However, Kressh possessed confirmed defensive powers, where Red did not, so Kressh has the advantage there. This is further heightened by her use of Force Lightning, her output sufficient to destroy lightsabers, which neutralizes Red's only defense. That being said, I do think a lightsaber-based defense against Kresh's lightning would be effective on first attempt before Kressh wised up and ramped up her output. In regards to overall application, they were quite similar, both integrating their Force talents into lightsaber combat, using their surroundings as an additional weapon. However, though Kressh was an extremely effective tactical planner, dominating Teneb Kel with her carefully laid ambush on board Lenico Colony Blue, she tended to let things slide when dropped into fights cold, relying mainly on lightsaber combat during their rematch in the Korriban Tombs. By contrast, Red was much more consistent, balancing planning with improvisation, frequently capitalizing on circumstantial factors. What Kressh achieved through tactical planning on board the colony, Red achieved when dropped in cold on board the Array. The number of Sith infiltrators that Red assassinated is unknown, but given that the One Sith Order considered him enough of a threat that they broke cover and mobilized to hunt him down, it was clearly significant. However, though Darth Redd's ruthlessness and deviousness is not to be discounted, especially given Kresh's oversights, her more developed power and skill affords her the advantage. Exal Kressh gets the edge as a Force wielder. Purely on the basis of developed skill and power, Exal Kressh has a significant advantage. As a swordswoman, she balances aggression and precision far more effectively than the savage Darth Rad, and as a Force wielder, her focused application of power is perfectly sufficient to overcome his meager defenses. Furthermore, she employed Force integration just as fervently as he did, allowing her to match his effectiveness in that area. Were we discussing Exal Kressh slightly earlier in her career, before Vitiate's influence became so detrimental, her victory would be almost assured. Her strategic intellect was brilliantly demonstrated on board Lenico Colony Blue, and though she was still capable of this optimized effectiveness when allowed to pre-plan battles, she wasn't capable of this when dropped in cold, which led to her death on Korriban. Instead, her compromised emotional state left her prone to arrogant miscalculation and berserker rages, underestimating her opponent Teneb Kel and overextending. Though it is likely that she would perceive the more formidable Darth Rad as a credible threat and tighten up her game, his intimidation tactics would be effective for breaking her fragile composure and provoking her. While Darth Redd's pure lightsaber-based defense would be ineffective against Exal Kresh's lightning, Redd is perfectly capable of tanking the hit. It is worth noting that even after Teneb Kel's lightsaber was destroyed, Kel was still on his feet. Redd's effectiveness is directly predicated on his physical hardiness, continuing to fight by focusing through the pain, and reinforcing this endurance with armor specifically designed for lightsaber and force combat. Despite her Sith heritage, Exal Kressh was physically unexceptional, and Redd overbearing her with brute strength is not outside the realm of possibility. Furthermore, despite his lesser skill, Darth Rad is an experienced Sith hunter who has tussled with multiple lords who were clearly above his own level, and yet time and again he prevailed. In particular, he owes his success to his ability to reconfigure his approach by fully utilizing his jack-of-all-trades skill set, allowing him to take advantage of circumstantial factors and immediately exploit any mistakes on the opponent's part. The very tactics that allowed Teneb Kel to blindside Kressh. Exal Kressh was a relatively high-level fighter brought low by pride and madness, where Darth Rad was a mid-level fighter who regularly contended with more powerful opponents through grit and determination. Kresh's skill and power would afford her an initial advantage, but Rad would persevere and soldier on, capitalizing on the onset of Kresh's berserker rage to aggressively retaliate. I declare Darth Rad the victor.